Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lecture 2 of this public art course. If you find this lecture useful, please like and share the video. It helps this content reach other artists, students, and educators who are navigating public art for the first time. In this second class, we move from theory to practice. I'll walk through real-world ways to find public art opportunities, including local, regional, and national platforms. This lecture is intentionally more technical. Fewer images, more links, and resources you can return to later as tools for your own practice. Public art is fundamentally about access, structure, and mindset. Many artists believe public art opportunities are rare, hidden, or controlled by insiders. This belief is one of the greatest barriers to entry. In reality, contemporary public art is highly professionalized and systematized. Opportunities circulate through predictable channels, follow standardized procedures, and are publicly documented. What separates artists who succeed from those who never enter the field is not talent alone, but an understanding of how these systems work. This class reframes public art as an active practice, not a passive one. You don't wait to be discovered. You learn how to locate opportunities, evaluate them critically, and decide where to invest your time and energy. Public art is not about chasing every call. It's about building a sustainable professional rhythm. Everything we discuss here supports the rest of the course. When you design murals, sculptures, installations, and proposals later on, you are already training for this system. Lecture 2 lays the groundwork for understanding how ideas move from the studio into public space. We begin this second class with national websites and platforms because they represent the most transparent entry point into the field. Platforms such as Call for Entry, Public Artist, CodaWorks, and the Americans for the Arts Public Art Resource Center exist precisely because public art needed structure and fairness. These platforms aggregate opportunities and present them in standardized formats so artists across the country can access them equally. Standardization is not neutral. It is intentional. Agencies use it to evaluate professionalism. They are not only looking at your artwork, they are observing whether you can follow instructions, meet deadlines, and communicate clearly. These are not secondary skills in public art. They are central. At this stage, you should resist the urge to apply immediately. Instead, spend time reading calls closely. Look at budgets. Look at eligibility requirements. Look at the language used to describe community engagement, durability, and maintenance. This observational phase is how artists learn the field without risk. Learning how opportunities are framed is the first professional step toward participating in them. Washington, D.C., which has one of the most structured and active public art ecosystems in the country. For artists living in the district, the D.C. Commission on the Arts and Humanities, DCCAH, is the single most important institution to understand. DCCAH administers public art commissions, fellowships, project grants, and special initiatives tied to city agencies. Many of these opportunities are restricted to DC-based artists, meaning residency matters here more than reputation. What's important for students to understand is that DCCAH opportunities are not just about funding. They are also about visibility. Applying, even when you don't win, puts your name and work into the system. Over time, this familiarity matters. Public art administrators rotate panels, but institutional memory persists. In addition to DCCAH, platforms like East City Art play a crucial role in the DC ecosystem. East City Art acts as an informal clearinghouse, aggregating calls for entry, exhibitions, and opportunities across the district and nearby areas. It is especially useful because it surfaces smaller, short-term, and experimental opportunities that may not appear on national platforms. Spaces such as DC Arts Center, Washington Project for the Arts, and similar nonprofits are also critical. While not always public art in the strict sense, they are deeply embedded in DC's cultural infrastructure. Participation in these spaces strengthens your local presence, which can indirectly support future public commissions. The key takeaway for DC is this: residency matters, local engagement matters, and consistency matters. Artists who treat DC as a professional ecosystem rather than a single funding source tend to build more sustainable practices. Maryland operates differently from DC because opportunities are distributed across the state, counties, and municipalities, rather than being centralized in one city agency. The Maryland State Arts Council, MSAC, is the anchor institution here. MSAC administers individual artist grants, public art funding, and project-based support across the state. What's particularly important about Maryland is that MSAC funding often supports process, not just finished work. This makes it especially relevant for interdisciplinary and socially engaged artists. Many MSAC programs value research, planning, and community engagement, all key components of contemporary public art practice. Beyond MSAC, counties such as Montgomery, Prince George's, Howard, and Baltimore County frequently issue their own calls for murals, sculpture, and temporary installations. These are often smaller in scale than national commissions, but they are excellent entry points. They tend to prioritize artists who understand local communities rather than those with extensive national resumes. Platforms like Arts and Entertainment Districts, Bethesda Painting Awards, and county cultural offices are especially valuable for artists in Maryland. These opportunities may not always be labeled public art, but they frequently involve public display, civic engagement, and institutional collaboration. The key lesson with Maryland is to think regionally. Instead of chasing one big opportunity, artists benefit from tracking multiple counties and building a layered presence across the state. Virginia's public art ecosystem is highly decentralized and strongly tied to counties and municipalities, particularly in Northern Virginia. Organizations like Arts Fairfax, Arlington Cultural Affairs, and local arts councils are central nodes for distributing opportunities. Unlike DC, where many opportunities are citywide, Virginia opportunities are often hyper-local. This means that understanding specific counties, Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria, Loudoun, becomes important. Calls may focus on libraries, transit corridors, community centers, or temporary installations tied to civic events. At the state level, the Virginia Commission for the Arts, VCA, provides grants and support, but many public art commissions come from local governments or partnerships between counties and nonprofits. This creates a landscape where relationships and repeated local engagement are particularly valuable. Platforms like Arts Fairfax Artist Calls function similarly to East City Art in DC. They aggregate opportunities and make the ecosystem legible. For artists living in or near Virginia, subscribing to these lists is essential. The key takeaway for Virginia is that scale is smaller, but access is often easier. Artists who engage locally, attend community meetings, and apply consistently can build strong regional visibility without competing nationally. This slide brings together a group of regional and general support platforms that are extremely important, even though they don't always look like traditional public art commissioning bodies. What these organizations do is support the conditions that make public art possible: research time, experimentation, collaboration, and visibility. I'll start with Mid-Atlantic Arts. This is a regional organization that supports artists and presenters across the Mid-Atlantic. Their programs often focus on touring, partnerships, residencies, and interdisciplinary work. While they don't always issue direct public art commissions, they fund the kinds of projects that often evolve into public or community-based work. For artists, Mid-Atlantic Arts is valuable because it helps you move beyond a strictly local context without immediately competing at a national scale. It's a bridge between local practice and regional visibility. Next is Washington Projects for the Arts, and in particular, the Wherewithal Grants. These grants are especially relevant for artists working in the DC area because they emphasize process, experimentation, and collaboration rather than finished objects. That's important for public art, where research, community engagement, and testing ideas are often essential. Even when the work is not permanent or monumental, these grants help you develop ideas, documentation, and professional language that strengthen future public art proposals. GrantWatch works a bit differently. It's a database rather than a commissioning body, and it aggregates current grants and funding opportunities for artists and arts organizations. The key skill with GrantWatch is discernment. Not every listing will be relevant, but if you learn to scan eligibility, geography, and scope quickly, it becomes a useful tool for identifying funding that supports public or socially engaged work, especially in DC and Maryland. The Art League's Artist Opportunities blog is another important resource, particularly because it aggregates opportunities on a weekly basis. This includes exhibitions, calls, awards, and sometimes public or semi-public projects. It's especially useful early in your career because it keeps you in a regular rhythm of looking, evaluating, and applying, which is a professional habit. Finally, I want to point out local art networks and events, such as Arlington's Artist Opportunities and the Bethesda Painting Awards. These may not always be labeled as public art, but they provide visibility, experience working with institutions, and public presentation. All of that counts when building a public art track record. The key takeaway from this slide is that not all public art pathways look like commissions. Regional and general support platforms help you build momentum, credibility, and professional presence, all of which feed directly into public art practice. Mailing lists remain one of the most powerful and underrated tools in public art. While national platforms are useful, many opportunities, especially smaller, more accessible ones, are distributed locally. City arts offices, county cultural affairs departments, and state agencies often circulate calls directly through their own lists. Overlap between lists is not a flaw, it is a feature. Seeing the same call multiple times reinforces its importance and ensures visibility. For early career artists, local opportunities are often the most realistic entry point. These projects tend to have smaller budgets, fewer applicants, and stronger expectations of local knowledge rather than national reputation. Applying locally also builds relationships. Even if you are not selected, your name, work, and professionalism become familiar. Over time, this familiarity matters. Public art careers are built incrementally, and mailing lists are how artists stay in the flow of opportunities rather than reacting sporadically. Mailing lists remain one of the most powerful and underrated tools in public art. While national platforms are useful, many opportunities, especially smaller, more accessible ones, are distributed locally. City arts offices, county cultural affairs departments, and state agencies often circulate calls directly through their own lists. Overlap between lists is not a flaw, it is a feature. Seeing the same call multiple times reinforces its importance and ensures visibility. For early career artists, local opportunities are often the most realistic entry point. These projects tend to have smaller budgets, fewer applicants, and stronger expectations of local knowledge rather than national reputation. Applying locally also builds relationships. Even if you are not selected, your name, work, and professionalism become familiar. Over time, this familiarity matters. Public art careers are built incrementally, and mailing lists are how artists stay in the flow of opportunities rather than reacting sporadically. Once artists subscribe to multiple lists, the sheer volume of opportunities becomes apparent. Seeing 10 to 15 calls per month can initially feel overwhelming, even discouraging. However, this perception changes once you understand how the system actually functions. Volume does not equal competition. Most artists do not apply to most calls. In fact, volume allows artists to be selective. You are not expected to pursue everything. You are expected to discern what aligns with your skills, interests, and capacity. Understanding this reframes anxiety into strategy. Instead of feeling behind, artists learn to filter. They ask, is this a good fit? Do I have the time? Does the budget make sense? Volume becomes an advantage rather than a burden once you stop interpreting it emotionally. Artists self-select out of opportunities for many reasons. Some are practical, time constraints, low budgets, or poor fit. Others are emotional, fear of rejection, intimidation by paperwork, or the assumption that someone else is more qualified. These reasons are understandable, but they have real consequences. Each time an artist decides not to apply, the applicant pool shrinks. This means that artists who are willing to tolerate discomfort, manage paperwork, and accept rejection statistically gain an advantage. Professionalism in public art is often about endurance. Learning to evaluate opportunities rationally rather than emotionally is a skill. This class emphasizes that fear and self-doubt are common, but they should not determine your engagement with the field. I normally try to avoid public art calls far away that makes difficult to schedule meetings, site visits, installations. I also try to avoid public project under a certain budget. Let's say $10,000/$20,000 if they require permitting process, meeting with advisory neighbor commissions for approvals or letters of support, engineering drawings, etc. For example, if you start adding the cost of preparation of common permits such as surveys, building permit, 3 protection plan, traffic control plan, etc., you can easily spend over $6,000 for them. That would leave nothing to the artwork itself. One of the most important realities of public art is that most applications never make it past the first round. Roughly 2/3 are eliminated immediately, not because the art is weak, but because the application is incomplete or careless. Common issues include missing documents, poorly formatted images, unclear descriptions, ignored instructions, and missed deadlines. From the agency's perspective, these errors signal risk. Public art projects involve public money, timelines, and accountability. agencies cannot afford artists who struggle with basic requirements. This reality should be empowering rather than discouraging. Artists who submit clear, complete, and thoughtful applications immediately distinguish themselves. In public art, competence is not assumed, it is demonstrated. Public art agencies actively seek new artists, even though this may not be obvious from the outside. Agencies are accountable to principles of equity, diversity, and public benefit. They cannot repeatedly hire the same artists without justification. This means rejection is not a verdict on your work. It is often about fit, timing, or panel preference. Panels change for every project, and tastes vary widely. Understanding this helps artists depersonalize rejection and remain engaged. Public art is not a meritocracy in the simplistic sense, but it is also not closed. It rewards artists who remain visible, professional, and persistent over time. Artist registries are one of the least glamorous but most important components of the public art system. Many agencies rely heavily, or exclusively, on registries when selecting artists. If you are not registered, you are simply not eligible. There are two main types: pre-qualified registries, which require competition to enter, and open registries, which accept submissions automatically. Both require maintenance. Even well-established artists must update their information periodically. Registries reward organization and consistency. They are less about novelty and more about demonstrating reliability. For many artists, registries are the quiet infrastructure that supports long-term opportunity. Open calls are the most visible and familiar pathway into public art. They invite artists regionally, nationally, or internationally to apply for specific projects or artist pools. Budgets vary dramatically, from modest murals to large-scale infrastructure commissions. One of the most important points here is that open calls often serve multiple purposes. An application may be used to select an artist for one project, while also feeding into a registry or future consideration. This means each application can have extended value. Even when you do not win, your materials may remain on file, contributing to future opportunities. Invitational calls are often misunderstood as elitist or exclusionary. In reality, they are usually pragmatic. Agencies invite artists whose work they recognize, whose practice aligns with project goals, or whose presence in the field is consistent. Visibility matters. This does not mean self-promotion for its own sake, but maintaining a clear professional presence. Updated websites, documented projects, exhibitions, and occasional newsletters help agencies remember you. Invitational calls often emerge after years of quiet visibility rather than sudden recognition. Direct purchase is relatively rare for permanent public art, but it plays an important role in temporary programs such as sculpture walks, rotating exhibitions, and loans. These opportunities are often dismissed by artists seeking permanence, but they are valuable early in a career. Temporary projects demonstrate follow-through without the long timelines of permanent work. They allow artists to build references, documentation, and experience working with agencies. In public art, completion matters. Temporary work executed professionally often opens the door to more ambitious projects. Rental programs offer artists the opportunity to rotate larger works to different cities. The budget is sometimes just $2,000 or $3,000 per year or over 2 years. But the expensive part here is just the initial installation and deinstallation. Understanding the difference between RFQs and RFPs is essential for managing time and labor. RFQs ask for qualifications, past work, experience, and references. RFPs ask for concepts up front. Artists overwhelmingly prefer RFQs because they respect artistic labor. Concept development requires time, site knowledge, and community context. RFQs allow artists to develop ideas after being selected and compensated. Knowing this distinction allows artists to decide where to invest energy strategically rather than emotionally. For example, a city or an institution can prepare an RFQ, and if you are selected as an artist, you can be paid for the development of the proposal. Normally, when there is an RFP or partial RFP, there is no compensation for the work you develop. RFPs are problematic because they often require artists to generate ideas without adequate site knowledge or stakeholder engagement. This undermines the very premise of place-based art. When artists are asked to propose concepts too early, the work risks becoming generic or speculative. It also shifts financial and creative risk onto artists, who may invest significant unpaid labor with little chance of selection. Understanding why RFPs are discouraged helps artists advocate for better practices and recognize when a process is outdated. As young artists, you have an advantage. Respect established ones because your time and work is less valuable. Best practices in public art now emphasize limited invitations, honoraria for proposal development, and protection of artist copyright. These standards reflect decades of advocacy within the field. Artists should be aware of these norms, not to be confrontational, but to be informed. Knowing what is considered fair practice helps artists assess opportunities critically and protect their labor. Professionalization is ongoing, and informed artists contribute to raising standards. Persistence is the most consistent predictor of success in public art. Few artists win commissions quickly. Most build their careers through repeated applications, incremental visibility, and gradual trust building. Each application improves clarity, efficiency, and confidence. Over time, artists learn what works, what does not, and where they are most competitive. Persistence is not stubbornness. It is strategic commitment. A strong public art track record does not require prestige. Small projects, temporary installations, private commissions, and even unpaid opportunities all contribute to credibility. What matters most is reliability. Finishing projects on time, within budget, and according to agreement. Proposals with materials that require less risks, maintenance, liabilities. Agencies value artists who reduce risk. Once an artist demonstrates reliability, opportunities begin to compound. Remember, public art opportunities are not rare, they're everywhere. What makes the difference is understanding the system, managing your time and labor, and staying engaged over the long term. Talent matters, but it's not enough on its own. Artists who build lasting public art practices are the ones who think strategically, persist thoughtfully, and work professionally. If this lecture was helpful, please like the video. It helps more artists and students find this content. In the next lecture, I'll walk you through how to evaluate, select, and apply to calls for artists and grants, breaking down what decision makers actually look for and how to avoid the most common mistakes. Make sure to watch the next video. It's where this process becomes truly practical.